respect Chatham House rule after that, so we can have a good discussion for the remainder. So we're looking at around about 30 minutes roughly speaker input, and then we'll have a half finish at 1 p.m. But be quite flexible before then. So anything that you've got in terms of chat or questions, responses, conclusions, please let us know, and I'll harvest those as we go through. But as I say, first 30 minutes will be the speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A in the round after that. So let me start by introducing Chris. I think, Chris, you've got some slides, so feel free to share away. And the floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So what I'm going to show you today is some work that we've been doing at IWFM to look at how the pandemic, and particularly as the pandemic developed, how that's influencing the sort of the sentiment of employees when it comes to where they work, how they work, and I'll explain why that's really important. For those who don't know who we are, we're the leading professional body for workplace and facilities management professionals. So I suspect a number of you will have close relationships with facilities management teams. Well, those are our guys, and I've been here for about 5 years. But as Richard said, I've been around professional bodies now for getting on for 20 years nearly, which is a shocking admission to make, although not uncommon in professional bodies, I might add. Once you're in, you can't get out. It's like the Hotel California. So what are we seeing out there? So not that any of you guys need any reminding, but on the 23rd of March, this guy got up and said some words which effectively meant we had to completely empty out every office, workplace, manufacturing site. Everything had to be shut down. Now, to put this into context of how big a shift this was, whilst many of us, particularly in knowledge economies, are very used to working from home and having sort of fairly flexible and fluid working lives, the stats that were coming out of the Office of National Statistics was actually telling us that approximately 70% of workers, or 23.9 million people, had zero experience of working from home prior to the social isolation measures. So this is a study. You can go and find it on the ONS website, where they actually, up until December 2019, they survey people to ask them, have you worked from home in the last month, in the last year, or have you never worked from home at all? And that's 23.9 million people. Now, of course, some of those would have been furloughed. Some of those may have lost their jobs, unfortunately, but a big proportion of those suddenly had to evolve their homes into some form of workstation. So that's where our interest in this really comes, because that's a massive shift from what our members are out there doing every day, which is more about managing corporate space. So we wanted to look at what this was doing, and it was employee focused for a very particular reason, because we see our role as professionals as in supporting and enabling good work. So we care about the employee experience. We care about how people are coming into our corporate environments and what experience they're getting. So for all that, we need to understand how work is evolving, because work will influence the workforce will influence the workplace. So we ask questions that are looking at what he's struggling with, what's working well, how's home working worked. And we really wanted to get under the skin of what this enormous home working experiment was doing to people. And we did 2 surveys. We did one a month after the lockdown, and we did one 8 weeks later, in the middle of June, just at the point, and some of the headlines there give you sort of an idea of where the narrative was heading, just at the point where some of the lockdown restrictions were starting to ease. People were talking about getting back to school and all the rest of it. So what we will do is we'll be looking at data from both of these elements, and where I remembered, frankly, I'll make sure that I'll tag the data with April or June, so you know where that particular, because we didn't ask exactly the same questions in both times. There's about 5 or 6 of them that were consistent, and another 5 or 6 that were based on what was going on at the time. Just to give you an idea of the number, because we did it through YouGov, we've got slightly different numbers each time we did it. It's not the same people in each pulse, but it boils down to across the 2 things, we had 937 office workers who are now working from home. So we filtered out anyone who's not working. We filtered out anyone who's working from home but wasn't normally in an office. So the data we are looking at is office based. So it's very important that we do that. It's only one of many types of workplace, but this is about office workers who are now doing that job from home. So first up, what have been the challenges? And apologies, this is a little bit of a stat attack, but I've tried to use pretty colours to try and not bore everyone to tears on a Monday afternoon. So what are the challenges? Well, I think a lot of them are to be expected. There's a motivation and focus challenge. There's a distractions challenge, particularly those who had children. I noticed that in the examples we put pets before children. In fact, we didn't even mention children, but it might say more about the people writing the survey. Inappropriate working environments, we will touch on that in quite a significant way. Switching off, yada, yada, yada. And I think what's important to notice here as we look at these graphs is that teal April versus the magenta June. And you can see that generally those challenges have remained the same. And some of them have increased slightly. So things like switching off, things like taking a break have increased slightly in terms of the amount of people that think it's a challenge. And in some others, I think, distractions and staying motivated decreased slightly. Staying motivated has increased slightly, but distractions has decreased slightly. Inappropriate working environment, which may be a reflection of people getting used to it. But we wanted to explore, right, what have you missed about the office? So let's do this from an office point of view. What have you missed about the office? Now, what's interesting here, I'm just going to highlight these because these are the challenges, the things that people miss, that where more than a third of respondents have highlighted it. Okay, so face-to-face chats, physical separation from work-home life balance, face-to-face collaboration, the appropriate working space, and a clear structure to the day. And they're kind of complementary elements to what we just saw before in terms of the main challenges. What's also worth noting here, there were 5 things that people missed about the office. We then asked about what have you enjoyed about the people enjoyed about. Oh, that's the wrong title there. About working from home, not about the office. So this is about what have people enjoyed about not working in the office. And you can see first off, there's a lot more things they've enjoyed about not being in the office than things they miss. Now, that could be because of the circumstances we're in. But let's look at some of those. The time spent commuting, saving money on that travel, not having to be formal and wear formal clothes, more time to do your personal activities, because maybe it's a consequence of not having the commute. My commute personally, when I come into the office, is 1.5 hours each way. Well, that's 3 hours a day I'm getting back. That means I can go and play with my kids. I can, mow the lawn, whatever it might be. More flexibility to juggle that was in there as well. So you can see here there's a lot of things that people have actually enjoyed about this working from home, and go back to that stat about 70% of people not having done it before. Maybe they had a preconception of what working from home was, particularly a preconception of what other people who were working from home were doing, doing all the things. Actually, there's a great Dave Copeland video, where it says, well, Dave's probably working on his patio today rather than doing his emails. So I think there's a lot of that. What I would also say as well is that these ones here, apart from the commuting element, all of these things have increased in terms of the benefits from working from home during the lockdown. So people have actually really noticed the money saving. They've really noticed how nice it is just to get up, sling a pair of jeans and a t-shirt on. So those things are starting to come through. So we asked in April, how's your organisation done in switching to this new way of working? The majority feel that their employer was prepared for them to work from home for an extended period of time. So I think that's good news. Nearly 80% feel their employers supported them well during this period, and a similar number felt prepared to work from home for a significant period of time. That was in April, and I suspect people didn't realise what a significant period of time might have actually been, but they felt prepared all the same. And 75, this is a really key one, 75% of people feel they can still do their work effectively from home. And that's going to come into some of the stats we look at later. Just slightly lower, feel their employer has invested in enabling them to work from home. So really that was about IT equipment. But I do think some organisations were kind of caught in a hop, but they rectified it as quickly as possible. So what about going back? In April, we asked, are you looking forward to going back to the office, or are you not looking forward to it, or are you not? Have you got a strong opinion either way? So what we're seeing there, 50% of people were looking forward to getting back to the office, and 19% were not. Now, what I would say is that the narrative in the public arena has been fairly limited when it comes to this. We seem to be flip-flopping between polar opposites. I'm going to go under the surface of those shortly. But I think if you are in our shoes, where you're predominantly thinking about corporate space, that idea that actually half the workforce are coming back should be a good thing. But equally, I'll be sitting there going, what about the other half? Either the fact that they don't have a strong opinion in itself is a worry, that they don't feel a draw to those corporate spaces. Are we ready to come back? Well, 60% are worried about social distancing, 44% are worried about hygiene and cleaning standards, and I think this is a really interesting one for you guys, a third of respondents said that they were worried about the culture, getting back into the culture of the organisation again. And I think that's a really interesting point of debate. What does the culture of the organisation mean anymore in this sort of disparate, disconnected world? Habit changing, definitely. 55% of people in April agreed that this period has encouraged them to work from home more often. And this is really where I want to take us now, because working from home means different things to different people. We ask people, what is your workplace setting? And the two I'm going to focus on very quickly over the next few minutes is those that are working from a sofa, armchair or a bed, and those are in a dedicated workspace in a home office. You can see that most people in that central column, most people are working from a dining room table. So at least they're upright and they have a hard surface to work on. But I'm going to focus on the two extremes to show you, just as an example, how this is a nuanced debate. This isn't about home working or non-home working. So for instance, if you are in a home office at in a nice structured room, you can shut the door, you're less likely to report some of those challenges about physical separation, about clear structure, about face-to-face chats. You're less likely to worry about them. Equally, you're less likely to experience some of those challenges of loneliness, distractions, poor equipment, motivation, structure, and staying active. You're more likely by 17 percentage points to work from home, want to work from home in the future. So that 51% stat suddenly gets up into the high 60s, 70%. You feel more comfortable working from home for an extended period. You're more likely to report concern with going back to the office by 9 percentage points. And you're more likely to agree that you're going to work from home more often. But if we flip that around and look at our sofa surfers, you're more likely to cite a problem with separation. Oh, my screen just disappeared there. Yeah. Is it back there? Are we back in the room? So you're more likely to cite a problem with separating work-life balance. You're more likely to miss face-to-face chats, more likely to miss an appropriate workstation, more likely to report challenges, more likely to be lonely, more likely to reporting working fewer hours. And there's other things. You're going to be you're less likely to be prepared to work from home for an extended period. You're less likely to carry out your work effectively. You're less likely to consider home working for the future, and you aren't interested in more flexible work programs. And I think a really important thing to keep an eye on, more likely to want support with your mental health and to have virtual social activities. And you're much more likely to look forward to going back to the office. Now, I rattled through a lot of things there, but the point I'm trying to make is that some of these big numbers that we're seeing are influenced heavily by the work setting that people have got at home. It makes total sense, but what you can see here, some of the time it's a complete shift. 21 percentage points different to the colleagues that are working from home. So as organisations, we need to be aware of these nuances, and equally, who are likely to have these work settings? Because if you look here, our magenta sofa surfers are much more likely to be our 18 to 24-year-olds, and they're the group that really want to get back into the office. So what we as organizations need to do is really understand how people work, what they need from it, and how we can support them better in the future. And my final point would be, the final thing to look at is that I get really frustrated with this idea of returning to work, because I tell you this for nothing, I've been working as hard as I've ever worked in my career over the last 5 months. So to be told that I'm now going to go back to work is slightly pejorative. But what we're looking at is, what could the new normal be? Again, a term that I'm not particularly fond of because it seems to be overused at the moment. But what are we going back to? How when the pandemic's over, which it will be over at some point, do we just elastic band back to where we started? Well, here's some of the things we're going to be challenged with, because being able to looking forward to going back to the office, when we asked that question again in June, that idea had dropped 15 percentage points. People are less likely to want to go back to the office and more likely to say they are not looking forward to it. For many of the reasons that we discussed. So we are seeing a strengthening of opinion around, I'm not looking forward to going back to the office. What can we do moving forward? Well, top of the shop is flexible remote working options, working from home part-time. there's some bits in there that are very relevant to us, like increased cleaning provisions, but regular communication on return plans, adjusted desk organisation. So we really need to start thinking about, when you come back to the office, what office are you coming back to? But these are the stats I kind of want to leave hanging. So in April, 55% of people said they agreed that this period has encouraged them to work from home more often. That number in June jumped to 61%. Okay, so home working in some way, shape or form is not going to go away by any stretch of the imagination. But this, for us as an organisation, was really interesting. Nearly half of the respondents said that this period of home working has made working in the office seem unnecessary. And that is something that organisations are going to have to really get their head round. So just a few points on reflection. And the reason I say reflection is because so far I've given you stats to, and evidence points to back up some statements. These are just things coming out of my head. That there's some evidence kicking around, but are more reflections on what we're seeing. We are going to see organisations, we've already heard from organisations saying they're going to need less space. So people are starting to contract in terms of the office space that they're going to be having. I'm sure many of your organisations have had similar conversations. We do need to be careful about this sense of individual productivity versus collaborative productivity. The organisation will be very interested in both, but it will be worried about losing some of that collaboration stuff. But individuals will feel, I'm getting more stuff done, but are we missing something in terms of those coming together moments? Workplaces are going to have to mean more than desk and chair. Workplaces as a proposition are going to have to develop, because at the moment, people don't see the point of them. The current data has highlighted a huge problem with pre-pandemic workplaces. Loads of studies in my former world of employee experience, you get this 50% number that doesn't seem to go away, where half the workforce don't believe that their workplaces enable them to work productively. That was before the pandemic. So they've been under invested in, they've been underthought, they are seen as very static, passive elements and overhead. What pandemic has done is separated work and space, and this idea that work is something that can happen anywhere. But we need to start thinking about how workplaces in that mix can be a dynamic instrument in organisational performance. It has to have a value, it has to have a role. And finally, to conclude, most of the challenges have remained consistent through lockdown. There have been some changes in what we missed, the team, but we've gained time with family and flexibility. So there's this kind of exchange going on. Work settings available at home have a massive impact on these challenges and subsequent desire to get back into the office. And over the period of lockdown, appetite for getting back in the offices has diminished because home working has become a viable option going forward. And really, for us as an institute and our profession, we are looking at how the office could be facing a value proposition problem. And I'll happily speak about that more in the questions.
Yeah, please do. That was excellent. Thank you ever so much, Chris. That's great. A lot to unpack there, a lot to think about. That's fantastic. We've got questions coming through, which I'll take note of, and we'll come to those in around about 50 minutes or so. And what a striking thing. I think the figure you said was 23 million had never worked from home before. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Crikey, just puts it in perspective, doesn't it, really, in a sense? Has anything of this size or significance happened to the workforce before, really, and in such short a space of time? Anyway, I know Bridget's going to unpack some of the points you made, especially on the going forwards, and talk more about that. So Chris, thank you ever so much. That's great. Oh, by the way, I think within 2 minutes somebody asked, will you be sharing the slides? Thanks, Matt. I think you asked that, and I know you will. Yeah, so we'll send those around. Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. And I think Bridget is thinking of sharing some slides, not now, but afterwards as well. So Bridget, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Right, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Chris, for a fantastic lead-in. Can everyone hear me all right? Just hands up if, yeah, that's good. Right, well, thank you for the chance to talk about this sort of amazing experiment and what it means going forward. And I've worked in this field for many, many years, and we call it smart working. It's the title of the seminar, but we haven't actually mentioned smart working at all up until now as such. And I think the first point that I wanted to make was that the sort of mix of work, home working, office working, the different work settings, and what Chris was talking about, the separation of what work is and space. Work is what we do, it's not a place we go. And that's something that, we wrote in one of those books that Richard mentioned years ago. So this is not actually something new. It's just the scale and the perspective that's changed. So some of you will already perhaps experience of this kind of thing, and other people don't. There are pockets of expertise. There's actually quite a lot of understanding and a body of expertise about how people work in these different environments. But what's so different now is the context we're coming from and the attitudes that have changed by forcing so many people to actually find out what the working at home bit is like. Because that was always the place where there was resistance. That was always what people were unsure about, and particularly what organisations were unsure about. But now it seems to have flipped over, and it's coming back to the office that people are unsure about. You know, that whole idea. So that's where we are with this amazing shift in something which was sort of familiar, but we've got to look at anew. And I'm sure you, like businesses as a whole, you've got a short-term perspective of how you deal with the immediate concerns of people, you know, and how they actually deal with just working and the uncertainty around what work will be like. But the long-term perspective of where you're going with all of this, and that's really what I've been advising clients on recently, is where is this going, and how can you prepare now for smart working in the future without knowing quite how it's going to work out. So what I'm going to dwell on is really the opportunity that you have now, because whilst it's a huge change, it's a fabulous opportunity to actually rethink what the business is doing. It's a chance, because people have learnt all these skills. They know how to work at home. They know how to collaborate online. And in this ferment, there's actually a willingness and a desire to change. And I've seen that from the work we've done with people in the organisations I'm working with, that they actually are looking forward to a better work-life experience. And this is the chance to do it. So you can improve the experience of work, in particular, perhaps for people with physical disabilities. That was one of the particular examples that came out, that for the first time they feel that they are on a level playing field with everyone else, that they don't have to travel, they don't have to negotiate the office any longer. People with caring responsibilities, for example, that everyone is shifting their working days, their willingness to shift hours, to work at different times. People are familiar with that now, and it no longer distinguishes people one from another in the way that it used to. So there's big opportunity to rethink, but also for the business. And this is what I wanted to really focus on, is it's an opportunity for the business to think about, and for you with them to think about, how do you want the work done in future? How will you be delivering whatever it is your business does? Because you've actually got a fairly clean sheet of paper now to not start afresh, but to actually think radically different, and the chance of changing. So bearing that in mind, I thought it would be good to reflect upon what will be really different in practice. And Chris has alluded to many of these already. While smart working is similar, I think people will want more flexibility. They have found working from home more productive in many important parts of their work, particularly their individual concentrated work. The surveys show that. Anecdotally, they know that, and you can't put the clock back. So I think there will be mixed media, hybrid forms of working. I think geographical distribution of the workforce will increase. You will be able to employ people with talent across the country and across the world, but it'll make it very much more difficult to bring people back together in person. So office locations can move. You can have distributed hubs. You can use co-working buildings. You can have people working at home. So the whole idea of what the workplace is, it's more resilient perhaps to have different workplaces in different parts of the country. If one goes into a lockdown, if there's a problem with one, you've got the others. You don't lose everything all at once, and it's cheaper perhaps. to relocate parts of your business to smaller accommodation elsewhere. And on that point, offices may well be smaller because they don't need to accommodate so many people. And whereas always the sort of accepted wisdom has been that you could potentially accommodate everybody in the same place in an office if they needed to come in, which they never do, I think that will have to go, because it will never be the case that everyone will be in the office at the same time in the future. That's my opinion. And this issue of collaborative and individual work, we'll come back to that, I think again, because I think that is where the divide falls. And I think we do need to focus on this collaborative work, and particularly now, looking forward to another 6 months of home working. That's the thing that, whilst it's pretty good virtually, there's actually quite a few things that people can't do so well. There are worries about isolation. So I think that's somewhere we really need to focus on, how to make that experience as good as possible whilst people can't meet in person. In the future, offices probably will be designed to support the collaborative and social working parts of work rather than the individual work. But it will be difficult to get people together. It'll be difficult to get that kind of cohesion, and particularly for trainees and new joiners. We'll have to learn the job in a different way, because they may not be able to have the kind of one-to-one shadowing and training experience that people have at the moment. So that's a point that you're probably already seeing you have to look at, and something of a challenge. In my work with clients and talking to people who work in this field, there are a few things that I see going wrong that I wanted to, or potentially going wrong, as well as challenges that I wanted to bring out. And I think one of those is too much focus on the short-term tactical response. It's very easy to get sucked into that, but this is such an opportunity to look ahead and to move progressively towards a better future. That short-term tactic is drowning out quite often the longer-term view, and I would think that's not a good idea. And there is an instinct to return to the old ways of doing things in many cases, although at the same time you see a lurch towards, well, let's all work at home then. If home working is so wonderful and we can save a load of money by getting rid of offices, everyone work at home. And you're getting these two extremes without really trying to map a course down the middle, and a lack of business strategy and vision to balance these two aspects of work. And the other thing I think that is happening is because organisations, the people, the whole team really, the HR directors, but also the workforce, the workplace FM people and the IT people, they're working together, but they're not really sure what it is that people actually do. And if you're trying to create environments, a whole mix now of environments where people can do their best work, some of it at home, some of it in the office, some of it in other places perhaps, you've actually got to have a really good idea of what people actually do. And I think quite a lot of the time it's more assumption and less actual analysis. And I think there would be a lot of value in examining what it is that people actually do and what they think about the environment to support particular tasks, and then try and work, job roles, profiles, that kind of thing, so that you can start to map out what you actually need to provide in the future. And I think one of the other things on the cost pressures, it is tempting to think about the savings. And financial directors will no doubt be looking at very attractive savings, but the most important thing is to have effective workplaces and an effective mix. And so that may in the future mean that in the office people are more spaced out. They have more space. They are not as densely packed as they used to be, but it is not possible to save as much space as some people might imagine. So just to conclude, I think we did want to look at what you should perhaps be thinking about doing now. And this hopefully will come out in the questions as well. I think engage the business to work out its long-term strategy. That's really the most important thing, I think, so that you can take advantage of the opportunity. Think about the different aspects of work. People say they're very productive working at home. People value that uninterrupted time, that uninterrupted space, and they feel that that type of work is the most productive work. They don't value so much, I think, this collaborative work because they don't necessarily see the outcome of that or the outputs from that. So don't lose focus of the importance of supporting collaborative work. And engage people. Give them a purpose, give them a plan, give them a vision for the future. All the time work with them about how to solve this problem, and bring them into that discussion. Whether it's about the places, the times, how they solve the problem of organising some people in an office and some people not. And start as you mean to go on. I would say that's the last piece of advice is if you put policies in place now and etiquettes and ways of working, try to make them things that you can carry on into the future with a view to the long term. Rather than something that you will need to change later, because it's hard for people to change, to keep chopping and changing. You want to give people a sense of purpose and forward movement towards this smarter way of working. So, Richard, thanks for the opportunity to just reflect on those aspects of what the future holds for smart working and what I think aspects of it are important. Very happy to, take any questions along with Chris and discuss this a bit further.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bridget. Love that. That's very, I really take your point actually about the nature of what's happened has forced us to be reactive and to react quickly, and no bad thing in its context. But I take your bigger point that it doesn't mean that we shouldn't think longer term. It's just the question of, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean in practice? And I have one question already in from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, which was originally for Chris, but I'm sure it's for you both. Please keep the questions coming on chat or raise a hand and I'll draw you in because there's a lot to unpack here. So Sarah's question was, are you both seeing offices being redesigned for collaborative working spaces second or sort of an allied point, with collaboration being the reason to return to the office? Is that the principal reason?
Shall I?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah. Well, I think not so far. I would say that any kind of, it isn't so much redesign as just trying to make the offices safe, COVID compliant and safe for people to return to, which, because not many people are actually going back to, and certainly not now, but even a few weeks ago, there were not very many people, in my experience, actually going back to an office. It was much more about individual work. So the actual redesign of space to support collaborative work, I don't think is happening yet. What do you think, Chris?
No, you're right. It's too early. And what we've seen, and actually we did a piece where we reflected on the industry, FM industry's response to this, and by that I mean the big service providers that many of our organisations will use. What they were doing was basically coming up with the solutions right now that got you COVID compliant. So a bit like musical chairs, they were just removing every other chair so you didn't have to sit next to each other. But I think this is going to happen in stages. I think stage one will be get the tape down, get the screens up, get every other seat out. Then there will be the conversation that Bridget alluded to, where organisations go, well, hang on a minute, how much do we spend on the building every year? And we've been quite productive. It's what the Barclays CEO came out and said in the middle, although he did a massive U-turn, I think, when the economy started tanking, and he said, right, everyone back into London. I hope no one works for Barclays, and I've just put my foot in it. So what will happen is, and I am hearing from organisations, anywhere between 20 and a 40% reduction in the amount of space that they are taking for their office space. So anywhere between 20 and 40%. So there is a corporate real estate bloodbath about to kick off. But what I hope is the next stage is go, now that we have that reduced space, now that we are looking at our workplace slightly differently, what can we do differently to how it was before? Because if this is just a 40% less version of what we had before, then we are on the road to ruin, because that's just going to make all the things that are challenging about workplaces even more of a challenge. I was asked by a magazine just recently, like Bridget will have been asked, and anyone that talks in this space will have been asked, what's the future of the workplace, all the time, and it's impossible to know. But I did riff off this idea that when I was growing up, there was a load of things that I could do as a young teenager, like playing computer games, like, you know, all those sorts of things. I could do them at home in my bedroom. I was very careful there not to talk about all the things I could do on my own in my bedroom as a teenager. But I, you know, there was activities that lent themselves. I'm digging a hole here. Lent themselves. Quickly move on, Chris. But at the youth club down the road, I could meet with my mates. I could play basketball. I could, you know, do things that it was completely impractical at home. And I just wonder whether organisations have got an opportunity to think about their corporate workspaces in a way that goes, let's just make this a hub for the stuff that's really difficult to do on your own. And I think that would be a really interesting place to explore.
Yeah, the one